thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you, Dr. Craig, and thank you all for being here, and all you folks who are out there in the cyberhood. Hello, can't see you. No, you. I should ask you how many of you got pants on, because I know. When you get to do it in your own house, you don't have to get dressed up. That's okay. So first of all, I'm happy to be here in person. I feel like I've met with people over and over in the virtual space, but it's good to really be here. And a friend of mine remarked today, we're trying to teach all students well. Post-pandemic pedagogy, we know that the pedagogy marks a pivotal moment in all of our lives. And for those of us who have the responsibility of educating young people, it's just been, it's almost like we don't know what to do because things have changed so drastically. So we're going to hope the technology works so that we can get through this. And so I do start out by asking the question, you do remember the pandemic, right? Because people try to pretend like, oh no, that was so long ago. No, it's been my entire time as a Hagler Fellow. It's been in pandemic. We know that the schools were closed as well as other public facilities. I mean, I can never remember a time when you couldn't just go to a public library, but you couldn't do that then. We had to wear masks. Wasn't about whether you had a choice. In some places you were told that you had to wear them. We were hand sanitizing like crazy everywhere you went, and I know I have 3 or 4 bottles probably in my bag because that's kind of a holdover. Social distancing, when we finally got to the supermarket, they had little markers on the floor for where you're supposed to stand. And I don't like doing that because I like to see what other people have in their baskets. I don't want you to do any of that then. And then, of course, we had to deal with remote and virtual learning, something we had never really prepared for. I think that the pandemic both changed us and taught us. So as bad as it was, we learned some things. One of the things we learned is that relationships matter. Whether we thought about that before or not, we now understand it's not just that you can have any old teacher with any old kids. There's some relationship that develops as a result of teachers with their students, administrators with teachers, and so forth. We also learned that time can be a variable. It's like you sometimes are working 8, 9, 10 o'clock because that's when you could get it done. Before you had a little bit of boundary, I'm going into the office at 8:30 and I'm leaving there at 4, and I don't want to hear from you people till tomorrow. Wasn't that way during the pandemic. During the pandemic, you get emails 9, 10 o'clock, people expected you to respond. But also, I think that notion of time can be a variable probably meant to us. We don't have to be so dogmatic about what we demand of students. Everybody had little deadlines on syllabus, on their syllabi and things, but now we thought, maybe we can be a little more flexible. I think we also learned that technology must move to the center. Before the pandemic, we thought the IT people was just there to fix our email. You can't get this email. You can't get this presentation to work. Now I think we understand that IT is crucial. That the technology really should be driving the way we think about curriculum. Not come fix something, but come and work with me. How can we deliver this curriculum using the technologies that are available? One of the things that I've said to teachers is that right now, if we're smart, no one ever has to miss school. So you could be home with the sniffles, but I should be archiving what we're doing so that when you return, or maybe later in the evening when your fever is broken and you've had your Campbell's soup, you can turn on and see, oh, this is what they did today. Think about that. That is that, we never thought we could do that, but now we understand we could do that. Yes. And then I think we also learned, sadly, that schools have a role to play in meeting students' basic needs. Because the very first thing we started pushing out to schools was not math facts, okay, not spelling lists. It was food. Kids have to eat, and their families need to eat. So
schools end up doing a lot of things beyond what we thought they were supposed to do as a result of the pandemic. Okay, so I want to probably try to run through 10 things for us to think about in this sort of post-pandemic pedagogy. And the first one is remember who you are teaching and working with. The typical curricula that we set up to prepare teachers has an idealized kid in mind that has the traditional family arrangements, mom and dad working, mom maybe at home, stable finances, don't have to worry about money, we don't have to think about any of that stuff, and also optimum health. All right, so that's how the curriculum is arranged. You pick up any curriculum, it imagines that kid. When we know that's not most of the kids that we serve. So I want you to think about the students that you serve. And I want you to think about what things you should do that are tailored to those students, not to what the idealized curriculum is set up for. But as you think about the young people that you see in classrooms, what ought to be happening to ensure that they have success? I want to start with a video. I hope this works. Click it right. Nope. Oops. But let me see how I get to that. That's the thing we were up here messing with before. And I don't know how I get back to that. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So this is one of my favorite documentaries I have my students watching every year. It's called Babies. You definitely should watch it. It looks at the first year of development of babies in 4 different places in the world: San Francisco, Tokyo, Namibia, and Mongolia. So these families don't know each other. They just all have brand new babies, and the filmmaker watches them for a year. What I thought was really fascinating was that it's important to understand development. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about culture and language and national origin and what, but development is very similar across human beings. All the students that all the babies that you saw were attempting to determine how to act in the environment that they found themselves. They all were crawling at one point, but one is crawling by a riverbed and is like, okay, I can get a drink right here. They were all playing games with the adults around. Different games, but they were still playing. So not only are they trying to figure out how to act in the environment in which they find themselves, they're also attempting to determine how to interact with the people in that environment. That is true of every single student, regardless of race, culture, language, national origin, gender. When they walk into a classroom, the thing in their head is, okay, well, how do you act in here? You know, what's the rule here? And what about these people? How am I supposed to be connecting to these people? So I have this rule of thumb that I say 13-year-olds can only make 13-year-old decisions. Why do I say that? Because we keep wanting 13-year-olds to make 18-year-old decisions. Can't do it. They cannot do it. I mean, if they end up doing it, it's because they've been forced to do it because they have very stressful lives and they have to take on older responsibilities. So I'll give an example of a 13-year-old decision. 13-year-olds, middle schoolers, I'll wake up late. Here's the 13-year-old decision. I'll go tomorrow. Because I missed getting there on time today, so today's gone. See, the 18-year-old decision is, oh my gosh, I'm late. All right, if I hurry, I can make the second class. And we want the 13-year-old to make that decision, but they can't. They can only make the 13-year-old decision. So as you look at those babies, you realize they were all pretty much doing the same thing. They were just in different environments and interacting with different people. So remember that development is important. Secondly, however, I want you to remember that race still matters. It's not as if people want it to matter, but it's the fact of life. It determines so much in a society that is racially divided. So it has to do with life choices, where you live. These are not accidents. They are often determined. How you're treating, your access to wealth, power, and prestige, and your access to education, housing, and other valued resources. And it doesn't take kids long to figure out that some folks get more or some folks get less. So it still matters. So development matters, but race still matters. So I asked this question, what happens when you Google the words 3 African-American teenagers? I did this Google. This is what I got. Every time I Google 3 African-American teenagers. It's just like their own mugshots. When I Googled 3 American teenagers, I got this over here, and I'm sorry that this is very pixelated, but you know, kids with soccer, ball, and basketball, right? So we're already populating the internet with an image of who's out there. If it was about development only, we wouldn't get this. We just get teenagers. But what happens because race still matters is we determine certain teenagers fit certain profiles. There's certain ways we view them. Number 4. This is an interesting way to put it, but when the music changes, the dance must change. And what do I mean by that? You know, we all have colleagues who insist that they could be effective if the students were like they used to be. We didn't used to have these problems, which actually is not true. I had a woman say that to me in Madison, and then I went to a conference and I met a woman who was middle-aged and from Madison. She happened to be white, and she talked about how terrible they were. Oh, we were terrible. I went to Cherokee, we were terrible. And I said, you know, if you pick up the paper, they make it sound like Cherokee just got terrible. But you're telling me when you were there and you had no Black classmates, y'all were terrible. Yeah, because you was 13. You're supposed to be terrible, right? Or we know that research suggests that we start using lecture, what I'm doing with you, with kids when they're like 8, 3rd graders. We start just lecturing them, and then we wonder why they're not interested in school, why school is boring to them, why they're not paying attention, because we're using a wrong pedagogical strategy. Today, we are teaching the most electronically savvy and connected generation the world has ever seen. And yet we're still trying to give them a bunch of worksheets and trying to make them do pencil and paper tasks all the time. And a lot of institutions prohibit the very use of the electronic things that they're savvy with, which makes no sense. So let me just try and exercise with you. Now, if I was going to be mean, I'd divide you up, but I'm not going to do that. Okay? Because the Zoom people would have an advantage, right? So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to play some tunes. If you recognize the tune, and you can't just pretend you recognize it, because if you put your hand up, I'm going to ask you what it is. Okay? So letting you know right now, you can't fake it. If you recognize it, raise your hand. I will want to know the name of the tune and the composer or author of the tune. Okay, so I had no hands. Go back. All right, what if I play this tune? I got a hand up in walking. Let people could hear. Who is it? See? Halo with Beyonce. She knew it right away. Okay. All right, let's go back here. Yes. Okay, you know what it is? Okay, close. It was actually the waltz in A minor. Okay, but I did get somebody who knew, right? But think about that in the classroom. If there's only that one kid who knows that, how does the teacher then respond to that kid? Oh, you're the smart one. You're the one that I expect more of. The rest of y'all, I don't know what, y'all been like raised by wolves, right? All right, what if it was this song? The hair went, right? Of a generational gift. Okay, but what was that? And the song? See? See? All right, let's go back over here. Can't stop that one. All right. Oops. Okay, no takers. Okay, so that was actually Actually, everything on that left side was Chopin. The last one was Largo in E flat, right? So, but if you're attuned to listening to Chopin, then you be fine, right? But I'm gonna give you one last fun one. You know this. Okay, what was that? Right? Okay. And the song is titled Happy. So when you are close to the curriculum, you do better. When the curriculum really is about some stuff that's very foreign to you. Now, it'd be okay if everybody is at that place, but we often have kids who have more experience with one expression of curriculum versus others. The fifth thing is that the curriculum does matter. And I think a lot of times we try to pretend like, oh, it doesn't matter what we teach as long as we, there with the kids. But no, this is Carter G. Woodson, for those of you who don't know, that's a homework assignment. That is. But he said that the curriculum that tells the oppressor that he's the product of everything good and worthy tells the oppressed that they are no good and unworthy. The curriculum do things. They literally tell you, yep, you're special. You come from this lineage. This is your history. Or no, you're not special. You should be glad to just be here. Sit down, shut up, just take this all in. So the question then is, what is it about your teaching or programming that reflects the students' lives and experiences? A lot of kids end up going to school and nothing about school reminds them of anything that they know. They can't make sense of it. And the question often is, what does the school or your institution reflect about what's important? So you walk around, what do you see on bulletin boards and posters and the programming and the sports and the arts, and the other co-curricular activities? Do they say, this is what we do? I have a friend who is a high school principal in Baltimore. Her high school is mostly African-American, but she started to get some Latinx students. And the high school is quite good at football, American football. But a number of her Latinx students came up to her at the end of last year and said, wow, we sure wish we had a soccer. Her response was, if you can give me 20 kids who are really interested in doing it, we'll make this happen. So this year, they have a soccer. In other words, she didn't just say, oh, we don't do that, right? It was like, we're getting a different demographic. These kids are interested in something different. What are we going to do? So think about the curriculum matters. How many of you have seen Black Panther Wakanda Forever? Okay. I can guarantee you that if you go into most schools, most kids have seen it. Yet we rarely integrate what a kid's experience has been. So if we were doing this as a workshop, we talk about what are the curriculum elements of this film. These both Black Panther and Wakanda Forever are wonderful STEM films, right? There is science, there's technology, there's engineering, there's mathematics, and there is art. They're actually not STEM films, they're STEAM films, right? Because the arts are there too. There's wonderful design elements to it. But my experience with most teachers is they don't bring this kind of popular knowledge in to reinforce or enhance what's being taught. Number 6 deals with the issues of poverty and merit. I love this quote from my colleague, Beverly Gordon, who was professor emeritus at Ohio State University. She says, it's difficult to critique the world and change it if the world works for you. Why would you want to change anything? It's working exactly the way you want it to work. And so I asked this question, do we elevate students based on what they know or what they have. Case in point, the classic US science fair. We've all seen the science fair, right? And we've seen the kid come in with something that he couldn't possibly have done on his own. He's 9. And yet he got a nuclear fusion activity wrote there. And everybody knows that this kid's father is a nuclear physicist at A&M. But ain't nobody saying nothing. They're gonna let him put that on the table right next to the volcano. And the celery with the dye running out. Right? And he's helping to win. But is he winning because he knows more? Or is he winning because he has more? You know, and I may have shared this story with you before. My daughter, who was younger than her sibling, much younger than her siblings, is almost like an only child. So she's kind of had mom and dad to herself most of the time. At her school, they were using a curriculum that one of my colleagues from Wisconsin developed, exciting curriculum, maths and context. And the project was to make a toothpick bridge with 100 toothpicks. Good idea, you know, you're not just sitting there doing pages of problems, you know. Every child was given a bag with 100 toothpicks. They were supposed to go home and make this bridge, and the bridge had to be strong enough to support their math. Now, that on the face sounds equitable, because the teacher gave everybody 100 toothpicks, but anybody who knows anything about toothpick bridge construction knows it's not about the toothpicks. It's about the hot glue gun. Because if you don't have the hot glue gun, you have nothing. This is not an Elmer's project. This requires a hot glue gun. And unfortunately, I'm not very crafty, so my daughter had to call me and say, Mom, can you stop by Joanne Fabrics and get a hot glue gun so I can do this project? Sure. But she has other classmates who can't make that call. Who, if they make the call, the answer is, well, I can get it on Friday when I get paid, but not today. So she brings her toothpicks home. The other thing that's inequitable about this is I got like 250 toothpicks at home already. So now I can make a prototype, right? All right, which indeed we did. The other thing that is wrong about this is we got high-speed internet. Toothpick bridge, right? Oh, did I tell you that I work at a university that has College of Engineering? I'm a colleague in civil engineering. So I said, duh. Toothpick. So we made the first prototype that didn't work. And we made that one with our toothpicks. Okay. Then we made the real one, following the instructions of my colleague in engineering. And I said to my daughter, I said, look, we've been at this a while. My husband and I mean, she got 3 people working. She had a production team. So I said to her, look, go to bed. You got to get up early and catch your bus. To which my husband says, bus? Or you're not taking my toothpick bridge on my bus. 13-year-olds. What's going to happen to a toothpick bridge on a bus? Let me see. It's gone. So now you got to have an adult with transportation and a flexible enough schedule to drive her to school in his big old SUV with the toothpick bridge. You know, I came home that night. I said, well, how did it go? She said, oh, it was okay, but, you know, we should have put it on a board because, you know, some people had little trees. Some people had some cars on the side. We could have done all of that. Now, if it was a family math problem, okay. But it turns out There were kids in her class that showed up with nothing. Why? Because they never got the hot glue gun. Or 2, they didn't have another set of toothpicks. Or 3, they didn't have any help. I mean, I understand you're trying to get the kids to understand that triangles are reinforcing structures. And you're trying to do it in a fun way. But my daughter got credit not for what she knew. She got credit for what she had. And of course, unfortunately, she has this mother who's all about equity, so I made her stink about it, even though my kid was advantaged. And then, her teachers were like, well, what could we have done? I said, well, inequity is going to creep up into lots of things, but what you could have done is had the kids make their bridges in class. You could have had the kids design their bridges at home. Now, maybe they would have got some help at designing too, but at least let's minimize the fact that we are rewarding children because their family and their resources are greater than others. So poverty instead of merit, sometimes we can't really judge merit because poverty overrides. We don't know what kids know. I had a similar experience as a kid myself growing up, where my 8th grade science teacher wanted us to make something called a Cartesian diaper. It was about air pressure. You're supposed to put a dropper into a glass container, have a semi-permeable membrane over the top. And when you push down on that membrane, the diaper goes down. And when you let go, the diaper comes up. Well, all well and good, but glass bottles in my household had deposits on them. So no, you can't take this bottle because we're taking that back to the store and getting the 2 cents off of that. Every dropper in my household had medicine in it. You're not taking the eye drops, you're not taking the nose drops, and we're not buying a dropper. The only thing I had was a semi-permeable membrane. That was a balloon. I did have a balloon. So I couldn't do it even though I understood the principle. I didn't have what was required. It's interesting because I gave a talk about this for National Association of Research and Science Teachers back in Philadelphia, where I grew up, and I had brought my Cartesian diaper with me. So I said, anybody y'all see Miss Mowbray, let her know. I got it now. I got it. And so we have to ask the question, what does it mean to be poor in the United States? And these are U.S. Figures, Department of Health figures. One person with an income of $12,060, that's poverty in the U.S. But let's take something more typical like 3, right? Let's say a mom and 2 kids. $20,000 and $420, $20,420. Where can you live with 3 kids on that? How do you make it through a month? And yet we have so many of our kids living at or below that poverty figure. Number 7 is that language. In other words, your discourse. I'm not talking about your native tongue. How you talk about folks matters. So do you or the people you work with say things like, well, you people, right? Because you're essentially saying it's that group over here versus mine. Or where are you from? You just speak so well. Historian Ron Takaki remembers being in Virginia and a cab driver saying to him, well, where did you learn English? To which he responded, Berkeley, California. You presume I don't belong here, right? Or people telling me, well, I don't really think of you as Black, I don't think of you as Latinx. If that's a central part of your identity, what you're saying is you don't actually see me. Can't make, can you imagine a group of women being told by a male supervisor, I don't think of you as a woman. Really? Because you got a problem. When you do the demographic survey, you can't figure out who's who. Or don't be so sensitive. That's another You know, when you bring to people's attention the way in which their discourse is saying things to you that is off-putting and saying you don't belong, that's not being sensitive. You're actually helping them to understand what your words have an impact. So we also need to think about the way we talk to or about our students. How we talk to these young people matters. So I say we don't have an achievement gap. I'm not going to engage in that discourse with you. It doesn't make sense to me. I can talk to you about an opportunity gap. In other words, you're not allowing but X amount of kids to get in the advanced algebra class. So these kids don't get that opportunity. Or kids are in schools that are so poorly served that there is no physics lab. So the only thing they can learn about physics is from a book. They're missing out on opportunities. We also have a health gap. Some of our kids are not healthy enough to take advantage of what school could offer. You know, because when you're 7 or 8, you don't actually know you have a vision problem. The world has been blurry to you a very long time, and that's how you've been functioning. You don't understand that you're not really seeing what's up there, which is why some of the basic needs things I talked about COVID taught us, we do have to do the vision screening. We have to know who can see and who can hear. We also have an employment gap, that many of our kids are coming from families that were hit terribly by COVID. And so they have not been able to regain their economic standing. They haven't been able to go back to a job. We have an affordable housing gap. So we have kids who are living in multiple households because they just cannot afford to live on their own. Their families can't afford to live on their own. And we have a digital divide gap. We certainly saw that in COVID, where kids are hanging outside of McDonald's to use free Wi-Fi. Something like 60% of low-income kids got their electronic lessons on their phones. Okay, not on a Chromebook, not on a laptop, not on a desktop, but on a phone. And we have a teacher quality gap. We know for sure that kids in the lowest performing schools have teachers with the lowest credentials. It is not unusual for Black and brown kids, kids who are recent immigrants, to be in classes where the math teacher or the science teacher is not fully credentialed to even teach that. And we have a teacher preparation gap. And what has certainly happened in the US and increasingly around the world is that we're telling people, as long as you have a pulse, you can be a teacher. You don't have to go through a certification. You don't have to really be prepared. You just have to have some minimum credits and we will put you in a classroom. Because the classrooms we intend to put you in are going to serve the kids we care least about. And we have an effective leadership gap. In other words, at every level, whether it is at our school level, our district level, at our local levels and cities and towns, our state level and our national level, we don't have the leadership we need to get the kind of teachers we need. So, and I also say that we have an education debt. And what I mean by that is that there are generations of young people who we owe a better education to. We can document it historically, we can document it socioeconomically, we can document it politically, and I would argue, even though we don't have empirical data for it, that there is a moral gap that is a part of that there are just some things that are wrong to do and we should not be doing. So, the 8th thing I want to tell you to do is to begin to build some culturally relevant practices. Now, this is really shameless. Shameless plug here. 3rd edition of the Dream Keepers has hit the stands. What is different about this one is that I do document some secondary practices because I've been seeing teachers at the secondary level doing some fabulous things. And of course, those of you who know the work know that I talk about this triangle of academic achievement or student learning, cultural competence, and socio-political consciousness. I'm not going to go through all this, but all three of those things need to be in place to do what I'm calling culturally relevant pedagogy. Real quick, each component that student learning is the demonstrable growth in the requisite subject areas. I'm less concerned about an end of the year evaluation standardized test than I am about documenting what did that youngster look like when they came in September or August, and what do they look like when they leave in May or June. You could have a kid show up in a 5th grade classroom with a 2nd grade reading level and leave that class at a 4th grade reading level. Then they're not going to do well on the end of the year test because the test is for 5th grade. But they've grown 2 years. So for me, that's what student learning. Cultural competence is that firm grounding in one's culture of origin while acquiring fluency in at least one more culture. In other words, you come with culture. No one comes cultureless. You come with a language. You come with customs and traditions and history. And we're not just going to focus on that culture, but we're not going to denigrate. We're going to say, yeah, make use of it. But I have the obligation as your teacher to give you fluency in at least one other culture. Typically, it will be what you see as mainstream culture. But it doesn't leave white students off the hook. They need to develop fluency beyond what they know. And then finally, the socio-political consciousness is learning to use school knowledge to solve relevant social, cultural, civic, environmental, and political problems. In other words, if you wonder why you have problems with the water in your community, what can you do about it? What are the questions that you can ask? Who can you appeal to? And you'll have to use the skills that we've given you in literacy and numeracy and science to be able to make an argument around those things. So, if you focus on student learning, one of the questions I ask is, what are the big ideas that govern your field? I'm really disappointed that most teachers can't tell me that. See, if you don't know the big ideas, all this little minutia we teach them day in, day out, it's just Jeopardy knowledge, right? You got to hope someone asks you that question. But there are big ideas that make our fields and disciplines cohere. My field is history. I know what the big ideas are. I was talking to a colleague in math ed, and she said, you know, a big idea in math is you can only combine like elements. In other words, if you got a fraction and a mixed number, you got to change the mixed number so that it's like a fraction, like fractions and fractions, right? I said, you know, no one ever taught me that. She said, yeah, but that's a big idea. And kids get stuck not realizing, you know, you can't combine those things. They're not like elements. So when she told me that, it made me think about something because I had to give a talk at NCTM, and so I gave them an example of 4 + 3 = question mark. And I asked the audience, I said, what does this mean? Well, people were quick to tell me 7. I said, and asked you to solve the problem. I said, what does it mean? And people started to, well, 4 units of this plus 3 units of that. I'm like, I'm in 2nd grade. I don't know what units of nothing is. It can't be 4 apples and 3 oranges because there's nothing called an apple orange yet. You know, I know people do a lot of work in hybrid research in agriculture, but there's not an apple orange out there. And you might say, well, you have 7 pieces of produce. Okay, I remember I'm still in 2nd grade. I got 4 apples and 3 oranges. They're not like, I can't combine them. What if I have 4 mice and 3 snakes? What I got? Mike just got 3 snacks. One of them snakes is bigger than the rest of the snakes. I might just have one snake. Now we can chuckle about it, but that's the way a 7-year-old's head is working. We treat 4 and 3 as if they are real. They are not real without a context. They must have a context, but yet we want them to memorize large pages of number facts. But they don't know what they're memorizing. And so I asked teachers to think about what you do to ensure that students learn and understand those big ideas. So if you learn and understand the big ideas in history, you don't have to worry about all the details. You don't have to know who all the vice presidents were. It's not a big idea, right? You can go find that information. But if you understand, for example, that different historians take different perspectives when they look at the same event or document, then you can understand discrepancy. If you understand that historians create periods, that the periods are not natural. Periodization is something historians do. In the 1920s, no one was sitting around saying, "Ooh, we're in the roaring 20s." You need a historian to come back and tell you, "Oh, that was the roaring 20s." Right? That's something that historians get to do. And what do you use to determine understanding? How do you know when kids actually understand something? Like, put a note, did you remember Bloom's taxonomy? We're still teaching at a very low level if you can just repeat it to. Most of the standardized tests we give them are at that low level. Can you just repeat it or translate? Rarely does it ask if you can apply it. It almost never asks if you can analyze it, and it's certainly not going to ask you to evaluate it. Which is why when you get them in college and you ask them their opinion, they're like, "Opinion? I don't have no opinion." Yeah. So we have to begin to teach for understanding. This is an example of what I would call culturally relevant pedagogy in South Africa. I was there at a very rural community called Kwakwa, and this was the science fair. And these 2 kids were talking about over-the-counter addiction. And they had spent time in the local pharmacies in their town saying what it was that people seemed to be abusing. So they weren't trying to do nuclear fusion, right? They were literally trying to say what's happening in our community that's impacting it, and what can we learn about it? So you have to develop that cultural competency. And so we talk about examples of student culture that we use in our teaching and our work. But unfortunately, sometimes things can go terribly wrong. If you don't really understand the culture, you can end up stuck in a stereotype. And I'll share this with you. This is really horrible. But it was actually screenshot by a kid in class to his mother. He said, "Mom, this is what the teacher handed us today." And I'll just read number 5. Desmond gets $200 for a stolen BMW, $150 for stealing a Corvette, and $100 for a 4x4. If he steals 1 BMW, 2 Corvettes, and 3 4x4s, how many more Corvettes must he steal to have $900? So the presumption that the youngster's culture is pathological is what's gone through this entire exercise. So when we talk about developing cultural competence, you have to figure out what you know about your students' lives. You also have to think about what are your strategies for learning more. And understand that relationships are reciprocal. What are you sharing about your own life? You don't just get to dig into kids' lives. You have to be, in some ways, more transparent about yourself. The socio-political consciousness around, you have to ask yourself, what does relevant problem solving look like in your school or in the institution? And are you having students work on problems that you care about? Or is it problems of their own choosing? So I can't tell you how many schools I've been into and the kids were all saving the rainforest. And when I ask the question, why are you saving the rainforest? Or where is the rainforest? They be like, we don't know. This is what she wants. Okay. But we're talking about real problems that kids care about. You have to build your library. I gave some examples here of more current things, books that I've actually read or know the authors about. So we got Bettina Love's book on Who Want to Do More Than Survive. I know Rich Milner's coming next fall. They'll start where you are. Don't stay there. You got Chris Endon's Academic, Reimagining Academic Success. I've just compiled the book on culturally relevant pedagogy. Joyce King and Gloria Ladson-Billings and LaGarrett King and George Johnson have a book called We Be Loving Black Children, Learning to Be Literate About the African Diasporas. Goldie Muhammad's book on Cultivating Genius, and then Jago Parrish and Samuel Ling have an edited book on culturally sustaining pedagogies. Number 9, I want you to remember those COVID lessons that I started out with, that the relationships matter, time can be a variable, that technology must move to the center, schools have a role to play in basic needs. The relationships matter because no significant learning can occur without significant relationship. I do an exercise with my students and ask them to remember either the best or the worst teacher they ever had. Write me, do a free write on it. They almost never write about what they learned, the academics. They write about how that person made them feel, different things that person did to encourage them or discourage them, depending on which thing they wrote about. And what's your plan, I always ask teachers, for welcoming students? You know, one of the mistakes I think we've made in this post-pandemic thing is we just opened the school doors and said, all right, everybody back. We didn't have a plan to bring them back and welcome them back and let them know how much we miss them and what things needed to change, or ask questions about what's still troubling them in the midst of it. And what's your plan for getting to know students? You really should plan how you're going to get to know who's in the classroom. And are you setting high expectations for them? And are you empathetic? And do you teach empathy? One of the things that we are seeing post-pandemic are more fights in schools than ever before. And it's because when someone is 10 years old, they don't know to come to you and say, you know, I think I need to see a therapist. They're not going to say that at 10. To just know that they feel anxious and uncomfortable, and if you look at me one more time, I'm going to hit you. 13-year-olds can only make 13-year-old decisions. You have to be positive and energetic, and I'm not ignoring the fact that you too have been through the pandemic. But as the adult in the room, you do have to radiate that positivity. You need to be passionate, where you brag about what kids are doing that you have access to. You have to begin to build that trust and ultimately be yourself. The technology has to move to the center. This is a quote from the Google CEO that says, technology alone cannot improve education, but it could be a powerful part of the solution. So I've asked teachers and schools to consider the areas where you will improve the use of technology. And 3 areas are instructional, organizational, and communication. Instructional, that we create a digital record of teaching for students to review or to catch up what they missed. Where we have students be your tech assistant. Trust me, the students know how to video you. They can do it, you know. That World Star ain't got a bunch of old people on it. The kids made that happen, right? Organizational stuff like your attendance and your grading can all be in a more digital format. And communication, that's the way to reach out to parents. Anybody still sending them flyers home? I don't know what era you living in. We know, for example, that the last thing people will give up, even in the most dire straits, is their cell phone. They may lose their apartment, they may lose their car, but in the shelter even, people still have a cell phone. So we should be texting them. We should not be sending them pieces of paper. We know that time can be a variable. You have to ask yourself, does everything you teach have to be determined by the clock or the calendar? The difference between thinking about credit hours versus competency-based. What things can you ask students to accomplish that are not time dependent? And what do you think might happen if you became more forgiving regarding time? You know, we're so rigid, must be in by Friday. You don't have it on Friday, I'm gonna mark it down another grade. You know, I'm not gonna accept it after next Monday. I mean, we're rigid about the time when we've been through some stuff, y'all. We gotta be more flexible. And that schools have a role to play in meeting students' basic needs. So I ask the question often, if you knew a kid was food insecure, what would you do? We got to think about that ahead of time, right? Not when it happens. You know, if somebody doesn't have enough food, what's my go-to strategy? Who do I know? You know, where are the food pantries that I can access? What resources are you aware of in the community? I was sat on the board of the United Way of Dane County, and one of the things that we provide is a 211 service, which is an emergency service. And so I've had a chance to work 211. They will tell you if you don't have food, they say, well, you can go to this shelter, this pantry on Monday, and you can go there twice a month, you go to this one on Tuesday. I mean, they know all of this information. But if you are a teacher and you don't know where to get the food, either you come out of pocket or the kid goes hungry. I sent a young lady to my church's food pantry this last semester. And she called me back and she said, oh, they were so kind. And she said, I thought I was just gonna take whatever they gave me. She said, it was like I could shop. I could pull stuff off and they had meats. They didn't just have like canned stuff. But her teacher didn't know that. I often ask, what did your school do with last year's lost and found items? And what could they do? You know, what if you laundered all of those scarves and mittens and, you know, hats? And essentially, you know, told kids, come shop if you need something. What happens when students don't have access to necessary school supplies? You know, that's the kind of stuff you need to have available for kids. If I live in a shelter, I can't keep up with all of that stuff. So I need you to be forgiving enough to give me a notebook, to give me a pen or a pencil. And do you know how to recognize health needs, both physical and mental? Because now, post-pandemic, we're seeing a lot of mental health needs. And finally, I just want you to breathe. Let me see if I can make my thing work. So yes, in the midst of a post-pandemic time, we have to continue to breathe. Our kids are counting on us. They don't necessarily know it, but without us being the people who are willing to educate this next generation, we will have no hope. So yes, there is a post-pandemic pedagogy that we must embrace. And I thank you for being here.
Dr. Durand is going to be doing the closing out, but right now we have question period. And anyone in the room who has a question, and we have Haisung who has online. If you have questions, and Matthew, could I turn around and get the questions from Haisung? If there are questions online, so we can be sure to have them there. Thank you. I can give the microphone to whoever has a question.
I just don't need my.
Well, I think they need it because of the Zoom.
So it's good to see you again. And as a fellow social studies educator, I run into this problem a couple of weeks ago where we've got some politically charged curriculum that, so what I'm wondering is, what are your thoughts on with the political climate the way it is and how we're going to educate our social studies educators and then educate our students?
So, one of the things that I think we actually have an opportunity to do more of is communicate directly with parents. And if we can lay out, here are the big ideas that we will cover this year. First of all, they will not get you down into the weeds and minutia. But a big idea might be that there's a tension between equality and group equality and individuality. That's a big idea. You can give specifics once you teach it, but if you share with folks, that's a big idea we're going to cover. If you have a question about the big ideas, please, let's have a conversation. I think we get in trouble when we start doing things where we don't communicate. We get in trouble when we start doing things where we haven't done any investigation of the community in which we are working. Yes. Everything doesn't fly in every community. We get in trouble when the community doesn't know us and when we don't know them. So the first thing I think you would want to tell students is make sure you get to know who are the people in the community that you're working with. And then what are the strategies you're going to use to have them know you? Because people, if they trust you, they will believe that you will not do anything that will harm their children. But some of the other stuff is, I know is political. I know that people are doing it to advance a particular agenda. I don't even know if they believe it themselves, but if they think it will get them votes, they will do it. So I think we have to kind of fly below the radar there and find out what is it that the community requires? What is it that they are asking? What is it they fear?
Anyone else in the room?
Hi, I'm Renata Pittman. We had this conversation, I think, the last time you were here at lunch, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up again. When we talk about culturally relevant pedagogy, I know sometimes teachers see at the surface level race and ethnicity, and maybe even religion too. But how do we get teachers to understand, especially with African American children, that their language is important as well, even though children from other cultures and backgrounds come in with a different language? It's almost as if it's more respected because they get services for like bilingualism and different support services Whereas African-American children are considered lazy, they just don't want to learn English and so forth, when their language is unique to them as well.
Right, and you know, this whole issue of what constitutes a language. Well, we do know that African American vernacular English or Black English vernacular, or more commonly Ebonics, has all the elements, of a language. It has a syntax, it has, you know, vocabulary, it has, part of it is teaching people its origins. I remember being on the Sea Islands doing a activity for Wisconsin alums. And they didn't realize that here we were on Jekyll Island. I said, this is where this language comes from. That the kids in Oakland did not make this up. Now, kids have their own vocabulary, but that's true of all kids. And, you know, white mainstream parents don't understand what their kids are saying. Okay, because they are using, you know, a very, youth culture language. But you can speak Black English incorrectly, right? There are rules. And most people don't recognize that. They will say, well, you're just being lazy. I try to get pre-service folks to understand, most of us do not speak what I would call American edited English. We just don't. And I don't say standard because I've spent time in Australia, in the Caribbean, in the UK. There's all kinds of standards for speaking English. One of the most sort of practical ways that help students understand that is I recorded their conversations and then transcribed them and gave them back to them. And they realized that they don't speak standard English. The transcript read something like, oh my God, I can't believe, and oh my God. And then he was like, oh, and then she was all like, and then, you know, well, and then, oh my God. And then, you know, and then we were like, you know, I just give it, and oh my God. And I said to them, what language is this, right? I don't think you don't have cognitive functioning because you do this. This is your home language. This is how you talk with your friends. And so helping them understand that none of us, except in formal settings, writing an essay, in a business interview, recruit American edited English, you know, in front of other people. For the most part, we all have a secondary discourse that doesn't necessarily match up with what we're calling standard. So a big part of it is education. And one of the wonderful things that we have is access to literature that uses the language. And so we can have students read it and then just kind of take it apart. What are they saying it? Why are they saying it like that? You know, we had a big debate once over finna. We finna go downtown. What was funny about it is the so-called correction was fixing to. Really? We finna go down. So helping people understand that, you know, number one, language has one purpose: to communicate. And when you certainly understand what kids are saying, you don't have to denigrate them or make them feel bad for the language they bring to the classrooms. And then you have to help them understand where are the appropriate spaces for the language. You don't want to take that language away because that language is that. That's how you talk to grandma, you know, or that's how when you go back to your community, everybody talks that way. And yeah, to learn to code switch. Perfect.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. So what is your advice for teachers whose livelihoods are being threatened by legislature to end tenure or restrict racism discourse at higher education levels?
Yeah, I don't think it's the individual teacher's fight to have. I think those of us who are at a different level with different networks need to take this up. I'm not worried about people coming after me. What they're gonna take my pension? I mean, what are they gonna do, right? I'm worried about that teacher in Iowa. I'm worried about that teacher in Waco. I'm worried about that teacher in Miami-Dade, because individually that person is not going to be able to survive. So what they do have to do is build some coalition. I'm actually working with some folks in Pinellas County in Florida, and I'm not working with the teachers. I know the teachers are behind it, but we're not trying to get the teachers fired. So we work with parents, we're working with the NAACP, we're working with the LULAC, with the Latino legal folks, and we're figuring out what are the legal obligations or legal options that we have. I would say that the best thing that teachers can learn is what are the rules in this place right now. One of the things that I think is really scary about Florida is we have the legislation in place, but the Florida Department of Education has so narrowly defined the legislation that if you are a librarian, for example, in Florida, you must take this online training at the Florida Department of Education. And they don't allow for most anything. You know, I was through with them when they said the Roberto Clemente book had to go. Roberto Clemente is everybody knows Roberto, but they already see that book as a kind of threat. And I think it is the narrow definition. I'm not asking people to stand up and put not just their jobs on the line. In Florida, if you violate this law, it's a Class 3 felony. So not only would you, maybe decide, I don't care if they fire me, I'll do something else. No, you're gonna have a felony on your record. You may not be able to do anything else. So the fight can't be an individual fight. They could have, it's gonna be coalitions of parents and other community forces. Right now in Pinellas County, the books that are banned are given away free at a variety of community centers. So if you go to see a play in St. Petersburg, there's a whole bookshelf that has things like The Bluest Eye on it, and they just tell them, take a copy of the book. So the community is going to have to rally.
If you have one more question, feel free to raise your hand, Salma. If you're able, she's asking how do I notice my question. She said that she would love to hear about the intersection of literacy with culturally responsive pedagogy. So that is similar to the question asked before. The reading wars continue, and she feels that we lose sight of the goal at times. And how can we wield culturally responsive pedagogy as a tool towards literacy equity for diverse students and learners?
So I'm someone who is agnostic when it comes to these reading wars. My stance is whatever gets the kid to read, that's what you're going to use. I use a very simple analogy. If your kid is sick, has a fever, and you call a physician, and the physician says, give them baby aspirin, then yeah, you give them baby aspirin. But if a couple hours later, the fever's still there, and you call back and they say, give them more baby aspirin. Well, maybe you might give them more baby aspirin. But a couple of hours later, that fever's still there. At that point, you're like, I'm not giving any more baby aspirin. We're headed to the emergency room. Well, that's the way I feel about literacy. If I'm trying to teach you using a particular method and you're not learning, you're not becoming literate, how much longer do I persist in that particular path before I declare this is an emergency? This youngster's not learning to read. I've got to do something different. So I want us to stop being so in love with method and learn to love these children. And so that may mean a method that not necessarily one that you love to start out with, but it's working with that kid. I got to prioritize the kid over the methodology.
So that's what you think, Gloria. Hey. In friends, I had to put that in there. Before I turn the microphone over to Dr. DeMiranda, I want to say a special thank you to High Sunday, who has helped set this up, do all the flyers and such. And I didn't want to make her also have to field the questions because she's our troubleshooter in the room. So special thanks to my son who really keeps the collaborative moving, and thank you very much. Closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. And once again, welcome to Texas A&M University. We are always privileged with your presence, and you always seem to leave us in a deeper state of thought about what you spoke about today. Actually, I'm ready for the test. I took copious notes on all 10 points. My favorite is brief. But I did want to definitely thank you for these insights this afternoon. I also wanted to thank the audience in person and the combined online audience of over 75 people this afternoon tuning in to listen to you is an index of not only the respect that we have for you, but the high regard we have for you in our Hagner Fellow. And so would you please join me once again in thanking Dr. Ladson-Billings. I'd like to also make sure a little kind of a program note that if you'd like to hear more and interested more, Dr. Ladson-Billings and Dr. Marilyn Cochran-Smith will be featured in the Zone Club at Kyle Field tomorrow, Wednesday, from 5 to 6 p.m. Now, this is to give us some depth and perspective that Dr. Marilyn Cochran-Smith and Dr. Ladson-Billings will bring a combined of over 90 years of experience and share their perspectives on navigating K-12 education in a fireside type chat that will be moderated by Dr. Cheryl Craig, and we'll have the same format of in-person and online, but I would like to invite everyone that we will also be holding a reception in their honor following this gathering. So our celebration of having our scholars on campus live from Texas A&M University will continue, and we hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you and have a very, very pleasant afternoon. Thank you.